Okay, perfect. So, hello, thank you for doing this interview with us. Could you introduce yourself and give us about a bit of background on where you are, what you do, and where you come from?
So my name's Rick Shiomi, and I'm a playwright, a direct stage director, and have been an artistic director of a couple of different companies. Um, I was born and raised in Toronto, Canada, so I'm actually a Canadian citizen originally, um, but I do have my green card. And then I really wasn't involved in Asian American theater or culture really through all the time that I grew up in Toronto. And then it wasn't actually until the 1970s that I actually started to get involved in Vancouver, Canada, in the Japanese Canadian and Asian Canadian community and culture, in a sense. Um, I ended up being the coordinator for a Japanese Canadian festival called the Powell Street Festival in Vancouver. And that was in 1977. And really, it was during that time that I learned several things about being involved in the Asian Canadian community. One was for the first time, I really learned specifically about the history of the Japanese Canadians, which is very similar to the history of the Japanese Americans in the sense of what happened in the Second World War and the internment camps and all of that. Um, all of that I had not known about directly. There were hints of it with my family back in Toronto, but it wasn't until I really was involved in the festival and some of the younger Sansei, the third generation Japanese Canadians, were looking into that history and creating material about that history. And so, really, that was one of the most important life changing understandings that came to me. And then the second part was really understanding how to operate within the Asian Canadian community and to be an organizer in that sense. I had no experience in that up to that point, and that really proved a valuable point for me in my experience as an artistic director to be somebody leading an organization in a sense. And then a third thing, really, and it was actually the key to my emergence as a theater artist, was that I had wanted to be a writer for a long time. And I was writing short stories, but I was a terrible short story writer. And I was also a terrible poet. So I didn't really fit within my group of friends and artists in Vancouver. Um, but I happened, because of some trips I was making to San Francisco, happened to become friends with Philip Gotanda, who, as you know, was a major Asian American theater artist and playwright. And he looked at one of my short stories about a detective comedy kind of thing that was inspired by a man that I met in Vancouver. And that eventually turned into Yellow Fever, my first play in San Francisco. So I worked a couple of years having no experience in theater. I worked a couple of years with the theater company in San Francisco, the Asian American Theater Workshop, which eventually became the Asian American Theater Company. Um, and I had the opportunity to work with Mark Hayashi and Lane Nishikawa, who were major figures in that community at the time. And they were able to produce Yellow Fever in March of 1982. So that was my huge introduction to theater. And I just, in many ways, that was a kind of my breakthrough experience. And then I sent the play off to several different companies, and it was produced in New York by Pan Asian Theater um, uh, in December of that year. That's the very same year, and that was a breakthrough on a whole nother level because we got great reviews in the New York Times by Mel Gusso, and then in the New Yorker Magazine by Edith Oliver. So um, suddenly, in within a year, in a sense, I was introduced as a playwright to the national scene, in a sense. Um, and so I was really fortunate in that sense, and forever, in a sense, owe a huge debt to those companies and those artists who work with me as a true novice in theater. Um, in a sense, I carried on as an independent playwright, working with various companies through the late '80s and into the '90s, and then I started to visit Minneapolis, of all places, thinking that I was not going to be able to continue my work as an Asian American theater artist. I was there for personal reasons as well as artistic reasons, and eventually married a woman, Martha Johnson, who was a professor of theater at Augsburg College, and I ended up, as it would happen, as happenstance happens, I ended up uh, um, meeting a man by the name of Dong-il Lee, who I had met earlier at a conference in Chicago, but he was in Minneapolis as well, and he wanted to start an Asian American theater company. And so I said, I was still visiting at the time, so I said I'd help him, but I couldn't be the leader of it in a sense. So Dong-il Lee, who was a Korean American graduate student at the University of Minnesota, um, himself, Martha, myself, and a woman by the name of Diane Espaldon, who became our first managing director, sort of became really the founding core of what we called Theater Moo. And little did I know then that I would spend the next 20 years as the artistic director, because within the first year, Dong-il Lee moved on. He ended up teaching on the East Coast, and then he's back in Korea. Um, so I became the artistic director in 1993, and then did it for 20 years, basically. Um, and so it was really a huge journey that I had no idea was going to happen, but it did, and that's where I would say all of my organizational experience with the Powell Street Festival in Vancouver really came to be valuable to me in sort of helping to lead and develop Theater Moo into the company it has become now.
S- Just to go back a bit, you mentioned that before getting involved in Vancouver, you weren't super involved in Asian American or theater things.
Not at all,
Yeah.
almost.
What was the motivation for you? What made you start getting involved, and what did that mean for you?
So, in terms of the first thing became the history of Japanese Canadians, and realizing that my own life was actually truly impacted by what happened with the internment camps. Because, as I found out, my family was originally um, settled in Vancouver before the Second World War. And what happened is when the Second World War happened, my family got moved out to the camps, similar to the internment camps in the United States. So then my father then moved east. He took the opportunity to go east to live and work in Ontario, and then eventually settling in Toronto, where I was born in Toronto. And so then my whole existence there was just to be a minority kid who maybe there was two or three other Asian Americans in the high school I went to, a few in the University of Toronto. There was some, but I never really wanted to connect to them, and in some ways, I never really wanted to be Japanese Canadian. I wanted to be white. So I was a classic example of what happens when you have that powerful assimilation drive, when you are a minority with no connection to your own community, your own culture. Um, and so my traveling west to Vancouver really was to me a kind of escape from that world, with no idea what alternative world could exist. And one of the things that happened is in 72 to 74, I ended up actually traveling the world. I ended up going to Europe from Vancouver, then to Asia. I spent a year teaching in a high school in Hong Kong. But it was always with with a sense of I'm an American or I'm a Canadian in a sense. I'm not really Japanese, or I'm not really Asian in the sense that I could speak Chinese or Japanese or any of the local languages, right? So then what happened is I came back with this sort of inkling that there was something there in my connection to Japan and to being Japanese that might be worth exploring in a sense. And so I remember one of the things that happened was uh, I was in Vancouver and thinking, would it be like to be involved in the Japanese Canadian community? And I had an opportunity that somebody who knew me asked me to be involved in organizing a short film festival with some a Japanese film. Um, it was not a success at all, but I met a whole bunch of people, and out of that I was asked to be the coordinator for this idea of a festival, a Japanese Canadian festival in Vancouver. And then with that, I also started to become involved in a kind of a Sansei led group of Japanese Canadians, but also involved other Asian Canadians. Several Chinese Canadians were also involved in the group, and in a sense, what we did was we were starting to explore that history and the role of what it means to be Asian Canadian in a sense. And so that for me was kind of like the doorway into something that I had no idea of up to that point. And the fun thing for me was that in the sort of work on the festival, I became sort of friends with and knew this older man, uh, uh, Japanese Canadian Nisei, by the name of Gordon Kadota, who really helped me in terms of helping to organize the festival. And what happened was that he always reminded me of that TV character Columbo, the the TV detective, because he was this kind of Japanese Canadian guy who was sort of like Peter Falk in a way, short, unshaven a little bit, wearing a trench coat, had tremendous sense of humor, a dry sense of humor, and so I felt like, what would it be like to really write a character like that? And so that became the beginning point of Yellow Fever. The funny thing was that I wrote, I had difficulty writing anyway, so writing 20 pages would be a huge event for me. But in thinking about this story, I wrote 100 pages, and so I thought, wow, this is something must have tapped inside of me, that brought this out. So as I said, I happened to know Philip Gotanda, and he was up visiting as a part of a band, and I gave it to him to ask him to read it. And after a while, I asked him what he thought of it. And of the 100 pages, he pulled out one page and said he liked that page. And so I was wondering, does that mean 99% of the pages were terrible and he liked that one page? But I was becoming an optimist. And so I asked him what he liked about that one page, and he liked the dialogue. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And so we had a discussion about it, and he asked me if I'd ever thought of turning it into a play. And I hadn't, because there was no such thing as Asian Canadian theater at the time. And so he said, well, you should try to work with the theater company that he worked with in San Francisco, the Asian American Theater Workshop. And so I said, sure. And since I was visiting San Francisco off and on, I was doing some taiko at the time. I then decided, well, I'll send it to them. And they accepted to work with me. Actually, Mark Hayashi became, in a sense, my dramaturg, the person who knew theater, who could help me understand what I should be doing as a playwright. And he played a key role in that. He then went off to work as an actor in a play in New York, and so then Lane Nishikawa took over as the director, we worked together toward that first production in March of 1982. So it was a huge journey, but it was like a remarkable journey for me as an individual artist.
Just moving on to like kata related things, what has been your involvement with kata and how has that impacted you?
Um, well, I was invited as a member of Theater Mu at the time. This is 2003 to the White Oaks Conference, which was for minority companies like black companies and then Latino companies, so Native companies. So we really it was a mix of people. But within that group of people at White Oaks, uh, there was this group of Asian American representatives and people from Pan Asian, second generation in New York, Notco in New York, um, uh, uh, Ma Yi in New York, and then a representative from East West Players. So we began talking there, and we felt like there was an opportunity here to create a national platform in a sense. And what I really had the opportunity and the good fortune is that as an individual player, I had worked with a number of companies. I had worked with East West Players. I had worked with Asian American Theater Company in San Francisco, with Pan Asian in New York. So I had a familiarity with several different companies. The other thing is I always felt like each of these companies was kind of in their own fiefdom. You know what I mean? They each had their own local community, each had their local kind of representation and profile. But I felt like there was an opportunity for all of these companies to come together to have a larger platform, a national platform. Um, and so we were all discussing that idea, and I think out of that was the formative sort of seed of the idea. And I'm sure that Tim he wasn't there, but his representative from East West was there, and they said he had already been thinking about that as well, because he's kind of a visionary in that sense. Um, and so I think that whole thing started to develop initially as a steering committee, as an informal group of people. We had a convening in 2004 and then another in 2005, and all this planning that was going to go into the Big Bang conference, that first conference in Los Angeles. So we as that group on the steering committee really became the organizing force behind it. But all the work on the ground really was done by mostly by East West Players. Um, uh, uh, and then somewhere along the way, somewhere between the formation of the steering company, the steering committee, and the actual formation, official formation of Kata, a group from the National Performance Network really wanted to become a part of it as well. And so we had them join together with our group, and that essentially became the first, I think, official formation of Kata. In a sense, it was groups like representatives from Asian Arts Initiative in Philadelphia, Pangea Theater, which was also in the Twin Cities, um, and then also Teada. So there were several different groups represented by that group, and so and in some ways that I felt like that group had more individual artists involved with it, as opposed to the original group. I think was more of the traditional companies in a sense, with representatives from the traditional companies in that sense. And so, um, the first festival, the Big Bang, really was a tremendous success, um, and we then went on to have the first festival in New York in 2007, and then with the ongoing situation, Theater Mu and Pangea then co-hosted the third event, which was basically in 2008. It was a conference titled "Shaping Our Voice and Vision," which I think really was an opportunity for Mu, from my point of view, to really step up to become one of the more motivating or dynamic companies in the national network. And I think that it has really had a huge impact on MU's presence in the national theater world, in the national Asian American theater world, in a sense. And I think that that's, because of all of those groups, most of the groups are on the West Coast or the East Coast, and so they're more established. They sort of know who they are and sort of have the recognition of each other. But Theater Mu, as a startup company in the Midwest, became kind of like, oh, who are these people and what are they doing here? But then gradually getting recognized for the talent pool and the work that we were doing, and then being able to be a part of a national network, really, I think was really important to Theater Mu and to my sense of what we possibly could accomplish with the company here. So all of that became really important, and then I felt like. For myself, I really felt like after about 8 years, I had sort of served my role in the whole formation and development of kata, and I'm what I consider a strong believer in leadership transition, and that is that you know one of the dangers of companies, of arts companies, is they become so entrenched with the founder syndrome situation that it doesn't serve the company or the organization to have the same leaders over too long a period of time. So I felt like what would be the future of kata and that sort of national platform really had to be in the hands of the next generation of leaders, in a sense. And so I was one of the first to leave. Eventually, most of the people retired or left because they were all by the time kata was being formed, a lot of those people were already mid-career artists. And so, 8 or 10, 15 years later, they're already latter-day saints in a sense, right? But so I felt like the first, and then by 2014, I'd even left Theater Mu. So it was more like moving on and allowing for new leadership to take over.
What do you hope to see from kata in the future? Or how did you see kata kind of change after that leadership transition? Was it different or from your original vision for it, or did it kind of follow and evolve beyond what you could have hoped?
Yeah, I think that that word evolve is the key word. And to me, in some ways, an ever expanding world, because there's a lot of issues. In many ways, when you look at the early kata, it is traditional theater companies, traditional East Asian material predominantly kind of thing, but it has expanded way beyond that. So I feel like that's been an important expansion. No organization to me can really stay in the same place and hope to hold that place in a sense. It has to build upon that, and so I think that expansion of stories of the whole world in some ways of South Asian stories, the whole world of Southeast Asian stories has exploded and become an important part of kata. So I feel like kata really has, in many ways, served that purpose in a sense, and has grown and expanded. I know that any national organization, any arts organization is always under pressure. It's always under financial pressure. It's always under organizational pressure. So it's not an easy task in a sense to carry on, to expand, to keep evolving and keep developing. But I think that's what I hope kata can continue to do. And it has done, I think, in the past 10 years, 10, 15 years, has really expanded its base in many ways.
Do you have any hopes for where it's going to continue to go, or what you would, hope to see 5, 10 years from now? What the perfect future would be for you?
Yeah, I think um, the perfect future to me may be um, the scale of the work, in a sense, that Kata could become a vehicle for collaborative productions on a much bigger scale, in a sense. To do, there's a work like Allegiance, for example, that got to Broadway. That was an individual kind of project that certain artists worked together and gathered the funding and all that and got to Broadway and all of that. But I think Kata has a potential to be able to do that, to to not only be a grassroots and supportive organization, but also have the capacity to one day start producing major work on a larger scale, and getting to Broadway even with a production. So even those kinds of things, I feel like could be in the future if the right sort of elements and the right artists and the right organizational capabilities come into play.
Do you have advice for people like me and Anna who are kind of, we're college students, we are kind of just entering this industry and starting to work on moving forward with Asian Americans in the theater space?
Yeah. Um, I think there are several elements that I think are important to any emerging artist. One is really to explore your own work and your own talent. If you're an actor, taking workshops, taking all that. If you are a playwright, again, getting what I found for myself as an emerging when I was an emerging playwright was really connecting with people who understood my work and could help me develop my work. And so one of those things, and in a sense, we'd call that networking, right? Finding the right people who really understand your work, who really sort of value your contribution, and really want to give you the opportunity to develop that work. And so I think that is really important, and that's one of the things I would say that was so important with Theater Moo, because when we started, we were a startup, and there were a handful of actors that we could tap into. Um, and so the whole encouragement and development of new artists became the key to our survival, in a sense. And one of the huge accomplishments, I think, of Theater Moo was to evolve from a startup into a major producing theater company, through the development of local talent, through the development of artists, actors, directors, playwrights. Even now, we have people like Katie Ka Vang and Simuk Devongse and several others Mei Li Yang, who really have emerged out of this community, in a sense. Actors that are now working on all the stages locally, at the Guthrie, at the all of the major stages have Asian American actors performing there, and some of them are working nationally. So I really feel like, if you are a young emerging artist, one is to really work on your own craft. The second is to really network, find the right people, find the people that can mentor you and help you, and understand your work and what you're trying to do. And the third thing I think is really um, observing what's happening within your community, in a sense. Who are the artists that are making change, or valuing their ideas and getting access to the opportunities. I think those are just really basic things, but I think you've got to sort of, in an interesting way, keeping the faith. It's not easy. It can be very discouraging to sort of be an emerging artist, because there's in some cases there's limited opportunities. In some cases there's a lot of competition even for those limited opportunities. And so any artist has to have faith in their own work, but continue to work on it, in a sense.
What is your experience being Asian in the theater industry? Especially because I'm particularly interested because most of your work has been in the Midwest, where Asians are more of a minority than, say, New York or Los Angeles.
Yeah, one of the remarkable things I feel like is is how Theater Mu emerged in a sense, um, and how much work and went into that. Um, I feel like when I started in theater, even on the West Coast in the 19 early 1980s, um, you know, Asian American theater and theater artists were still considered a kind of a neat niche kind of thing, a small sort of out in the back corner kind of thing. Um, and I feel like in the last, 40 years, 50 years, it really has grown immensely in a sense. And so I feel like, as I said, the example that I have, as you say, is Theater Mu, where when we started in 1992, there was really like maybe two or three Asian American theater artists, actors in the Twin Cities. There was sort of literally almost no awareness of it. Um, and when we started, it was like uh, 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 you're starting with people who in many cases had no theater training, had no sort of understanding of how theater works, um, and it was really sort of I always describe the first 10 years of Theater Mu as like digging trenches because you're basically laying the foundations of something. You're basically recruiting the people. The fun story that I have, and I always tell Paul that I tell the story about Theater Mu, is that when we started Theater Mu, we gathered some various Asian American students from the local colleges and universities. And this actor, this person, Paul Jun, who's a Korean American actor, was one of the first to join us. And we had him in one of our first productions. And I remember in the in between rehearsals, we were talking. I was talking with Dong Il Lee, and we were thinking of firing him because he was so bad in rehearsal. But we thought that's too cruel. This is his first chance, and we're going to fire him. That wouldn't be fair. So even though we thought it was terrible, we let him go on, right? But the funny thing is, he was actually pretty good, because, and that's part of not knowing what the purpose of rehearsal is if you don't know theater. So I think in rehearsal, he was just wondering, well, I guess I got to memorize my lines or whatever. But but once he was on stage, he had this certain kind of charisma, this certain kind of, certain actors feel comfortable, more comfortable on stage, maybe even than in real life, in a sense. And so he was a natural in that sense. And so for the next year or two, he was really one of our leading actors. And then he disappeared, and then we found out he had somehow gotten into the acting program at USD, uh, a very prestigious place, right? And then he would write me early on and say, it's really hard because everyone else in the program was from these high end undergrad theater programs, and he had nothing other than working with us. Um, but eventually he graduated from that, went to New York, couldn't get, the joke is he couldn't get arrested. He went to auditions and just, it was really tough back then. This is back in the, I would say, early 90s, right? Mid 90s. But eventually he hooked up with a Sung Ro, a Korean American playwright, and they did a couple productions together as a part of the New York Fringe Festival. And I think 2 years in a row they got the best of the for the small play, the New York Fringe. And so suddenly they were getting attention, and he was getting attention. He eventually worked with several companies there. He ended up about 5 years ago. He was at the Oregon Shakes, which is huge, prestigious Shakespearean. company, and he worked with them for several years. And now he's back in New York, and he recently was the understudy, I think, to Daniel Day Kim in David's David's play Yellowface. Yeah, yeah, on Broadway. And so he wrote me and said he finally got a chance to go on to perform at Broadway. So um, there is that kind of story of what happens when you stay with it and you really focus on developing your talent or your organization. And so we were able to develop the actors and the kind of theater company at Theater Moo that literally I think changed the face of Asian American theater in the Twin Cities, so that now actors who were developed at Theater Moo are working at the Guthrie, at the Jungle Theater, at the Mixed Blood Theater, at all the major local theater companies, at the Children's Theater Company. So we really, I feel like that was the aim, I think, of our company, was not only to create this talent pool that was going to serve our company, but to create this talent pool that was going to serve the whole theater community here. And I think that that's what's happened. And now playwrights, people like Katie Kaw Vang are getting their work done by other theater companies here. Mei Li Yang. So all of these opportunities really have changed how people perceive Asian American theater and theater artists in the Twin Cities. So in a kind of, as you say, a kind of fishbowl environment where one would not have thought it would be possible, to have an Asian American theater company and theater artists actively working across the whole theater spectrum here. We were able to do that, and that was really important. And then again, in 2014, I left, and it was taken over by Randy Reyes for 5 years, and then Lily Tung Crystal for 5 years. So I feel like it has continued to grow and to become a recognized major entity in the local scene, but also because its connection to kata become a part of the national scene in a sense, and then generating artists who are now being produced nationally. Say Mukta is having her play produced by Interact Theater in Philadelphia. So that's another step out. And so I think that this is all connected, but that those changes really have been huge.
What were the biggest lessons you learned from being a leader in kata and theater mill?
Um, I think the one thing I'm very proud of is being able to evaluate talent in its early stages. Because a lot of people, as you say, yourself and many other young artists who are coming up, coming out of college program, university programs, or in their first few years in the field, one of the things I really value as a leader is the ability to understand who has what levels of talent and who has what levels of potential, in a sense, and giving them the opportunity to do those things. And I think that that's really a huge responsibility for any Asian American theater leader, is to evaluate and cultivate talent within our community, because it's not, in many ways, it's not a huge community that has a huge tradition in Western theater. And so I feel like we really have to be conscious about developing those talents, because in many cases, when I would say, there are theater companies, big theater companies like the Guthrie or the Children's Theater, or various mid-sized companies. In some ways, they have no vested interest in particularly developing Asian American theater artists, and so Theater Moo did that. And so then when they say, oh well, we have to have artists at a certain level of experience and talent and all that, and we say, hey, we've developed these people. They have that talent level that they deserve to be on your stages, and that's all happening. And so I feel like one of the primary responsibilities is to develop new talent, is writers, directors, designers, actors, for sure. All of those, all these different elements in theater. And it's an ongoing process because um, it's not like you develop one wave of artists. It's more, because that wave is going to come and go in many ways. We've had a number of people who we've sort of helped to develop here, give some experience here, give the opportunity here, but they want to go off to LA or New York to go to that, in their minds, that next level up of opportunity, exposure, whatever it is, whether they want to get into film or whether they want to get into onto Broadway or whatever. But though, so when those people take those opportunities, you have to be developing people behind them in order to fill in the places that they have sort of moved on from. And so I feel like that's a constant. That's going to be a constant. I think another important value for a leader is always negotiating with different communities, because Asian American theater is trying to represent a whole slew of different sort of ethnic groups. If you have a Chinese American, Japanese American, South Asian, there's all these different communities that don't necessarily identify with each other, in a sense. And so, as an Asian American theater company, you have it's important to try to bring in as many different groups as you can. A particular group here in the Twin Cities is the Hmong American community, and so really that is in fact the largest group in the Minnesota of Asian Americans, and so tapping into that, bringing the artists, cultivating the artists out of that community is very important here specifically. So each community has its own specific sort of composition of different groups, and as a leader, I think you have to kind of understand how to want to negotiate and to bring in and involve as much of them as possible. Yeah, and I think the the third part really is if you're an artistic director, understanding what your own talent is, in a sense, because every artistic director is going to do something. They may be an actor, they may be a writer, they may be a designer, um, uh, and so they have to be able to understand how they can sustain their own artistry, but fit within the normal development and organization of the company. So since I was for myself, I was basically a combination of playwright and director. So early on, they did a couple of my plays, or I did some of the writing of the plays, but gradually it really became about the work of developing new playwrights. Um, and then as a director, I would direct one show a year or something like that with Theater Move. And it was always a great opportunity for me as an artist, but also I think it served the company as well. So there's a kind of understand, an artistic director has to also understand their own talent and the relative relationship of their individual talent to the needs of the company. Those are some of the things.
How did things change for you? Oh, sorry, Anna.
Oh,
Or
sorry. Yeah, I was just gonna ask
yeah.
the same question. I was just like, how did things change for you after you stepped down from Cotton Theatre Mu, or like, what are you up to these days?
So after 2014, of course, went and started another theater company, and called Full Circle Theater Company with my wife Martha Johnson and a couple of other artists. Its mandate was a kind of a broader, multi sort of racial platform for work, and so we did a wide range of different work. So we did that for 10 years, but then Last year, I stepped down from that, so I became basically a freelance, back to my freelance life as a playwright and a director. Uh, I'm really not as interested in directing unless the right opportunity came up. Um, Something that I was really excited about. But I've continued to write plays, and so um, a couple of years ago I had a production of a play called Fire in the New World, which is a continuation of my Sam Shikazi detective series. Um, and it is getting a reading at Pan Asian Rep in New York this summer in July, and then supposedly a production in February next year. So that's going on. Last year, I had a production of a new play I wrote called Secret Warriors, which is about the Japanese Americans during the Second World War who came to Minneapolis, to the Twin Cities, basically, to study Japanese. Because they would then served in the Pacific during the Second World War as translators and interpreters and interrogators, kind of thing. And so that play was produced by the History Theater here and had a great time. And so now I have that play. And because of the success of that, I got a commission from the History Theater to write another play. So I continue to be involved as a playwright and theater.
Amazing. And you've done clearly so much with so many different organizations. Just wanted to ask, is there like a single thing that you are proudest of doing as an artist or as a leader, or what
Um,
is the thing that
yeah, I
gives
think
you so much joy?
as an individual artist, I feel like as a playwright, definitely Yellow Fever as my first play, and interestingly enough, Secret Warriors, which I can't imagine that 40 years later I was still writing plays. But that play, Secret Warriors, really to me um, told a story that not many people know about, in a sense, and so those two plays to me really stand out for me as a playwright. As a director, I really am proud of the work I did with several musicals, which to me were completely like unexpected because I'm not a musician in that sense, even though I played a bit of taiko and things like that. But I directed a production of Into the Woods that we reset in Asia, and so instead of all these European fairy tales, we used them as Asian fairy tales, and it was really a lot of fun. I did a production of Shakespeare's Midsummer, which I felt like I was really proud of and really excited about. Um, but then, in terms of organization, it's all of my work at Theater Move. It's just like I am so proud and happy of how successful Theater Move has become. That it has generated a lot of talented people, and giving them the opportunity to develop their abilities. A lot of actors and playwrights, directors, all of these people, I think, had an opportunity to develop their careers through Theater Move, and I'm really happy about that.
Did we miss anything? Is there anything else you want to speak to? Because that is the end of our questions that we sent.
Um, One of the things is I'm really sort of there's this whole organizational side of what happened with Kata and what happened with all the theater companies, but I really am impressed with what the individual Asian American theater artists have done. People like David Wong, Lauren Yee, Sandra Oh, Daniel Day Kim, Tai Ma. There's so many individual artists who have emerged. They may have sort of been developed through the Asian American Theater Company system or opportunities, but but they've shown talent at a national level that's been so impressive. And so I feel like they have played an important part of this whole what is the impact, what is the role, what is the place of Asian American theater artists, performing artists, all of that in American culture, in a sense. And they have had a huge impact. So I feel like that's also a part of it, besides the whole organizational side of it, where the theater companies and organizations have cultivated and developed new talent, kind of thing. Uh, um, and so that's one thing that I really have always been aware of.
Wonderful. Anna, do you have any other questions you want to ask?
No, I think that's it for me. Thank you so much.
Perfect. I'm gonna end the recording. Oh, actually, one more thing. Could you just say, like, my name is blank and I am a legacy leader?
Okay. Um, mine. What's the blank?
Just my name is, and
Oh
then I
yeah.
am a legacy leader. Yeah.
Okay. Uh, my name is Rick Shiomi, and I am a legacy leader.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I'm gonna end that recording.